Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're taking a close look at Gokaldas Exports.
Yeah.
Gokaldas Exports is a company that you've probably never heard of, but you've almost certainly worn something that they've made. They are a global giant in the apparel industry, and today we're going to unravel their story, what they do, where they fit in the global fashion landscape, and what the future might hold for them.
Yeah, one of the things that I find fascinating about Gokaldas Exports is their history. I mean, this is a company that has been around for over 45 years.
Wow.
They have really built themselves up to become one of the leading apparel manufacturers in the world. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Starting in India, not exactly a country that's traditionally been known as a fashion powerhouse.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, to grasp the scale of Gokaldas, just consider this one fact. They produce 87 million garments every year.
Yeah.
87 million. That's more clothes than most of us could even fathom.
It really is. And to produce that mountain of clothes, they have a massive workforce, over 51,000 skilled employees.
Wow.
And they use more than 30,000 advanced machines across over 30 state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities.
It's just incredible, the scale of their operations. And they ship all over the world, right? How many countries?
Over 50 countries around the world.
Really?
But their primary market, their main customer base, remains North America.
Now, one thing that really stands out to me about Gokaldas is their vertical integration. They handle pretty much everything in-house, right? From design and development all the way to the actual cutting and sewing of the garments.
That's right. It's unusual in the industry to have that level of control, and it really allows them to maintain those high standards and meet the very specific demands of their clients.
And it's not just about producing clothes. It seems that Gokaldas is really committed to sustainability, which is becoming increasingly important to consumers and investors alike, right?
Oh, absolutely. Sustainability is no longer just a buzzword. It is a core value for many businesses today. And Gokaldas is taking it very seriously. They have set these very ambitious goals for themselves. They want to reach net zero emissions. They want to become water positive, meaning they replenish more water than they use.
That's fantastic.
And they want to eliminate solid waste going to landfills. They've already made some progress. They've managed to reduce water usage by 20% across their facilities,
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
which is pretty impressive given the scale of their operation.
Now let's zoom out for a second and look at the broader picture, the global apparel industry itself. If you think about the clothes that you're buying, have you noticed any changes recently? Maybe you're seeing more emphasis on sportswear or this rise of what they call athleisure. What do you think?
Yeah, you're right on the money. These trends are really reflecting some of the challenges and also the opportunities that the global apparel industry is facing.
That's interesting. So tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Well, in 2023, the industry faced some pretty strong headwinds, primarily because of something called inventory destocking. Basically, what happened is after those supply chain disruptions that we saw during the pandemic, a lot of retailers ended up with too much inventory.
Makes sense.
So to clear that out, they had to reduce their purchases. And this led to a significant drop, something like a 20% decline in apparel purchases in the U.S.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah, and that, of course, has a ripple effect across the globe.
So it sounds like things were a little bit shaky for the fashion world there for a bit.
Yeah, they were, but it's important to remember that this is a massive industry. We're talking about global textile and apparel trade that reached almost $1 trillion in 2022.
Wow.
$910 billion to be exact.
Just mind-boggling.
And the good news is that the inventory destocking cycle seems to be coming to an end.
Okay, so there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. A lot of fashion brands are starting to show healthier inventory levels, their financial performance is improving, and they're showing a renewed appetite for purchases.
So what are some of the specific trends in the industry that we should be thinking about as we analyze Gokaldas Exports?
There are a few key trends that I think are really having an impact on companies like Gokaldas. First of all, we're seeing this growing demand for sportswear and children's wear. This is being driven by the global wellness trend and also by changing demographics.
Okay.
Then you have the athleisure trend that you mentioned earlier, which is
Right.
really blurring the lines between casual wear and athletic wear. It's creating a whole new market segment.
Yeah, yoga pants everywhere.
Exactly. And technology is playing a huge role as well.
Oh, absolutely.
We're seeing more and more adoption of AI robotics and even virtual try-on tools.
That's wild.
It's really helping to streamline production, make things more efficient, and also improve the overall customer experience.
Now let's bring our focus back to Gokaldas and their financial performance. Despite a challenging market in 2023, they still managed to achieve revenue growth of 7.05% in fiscal year 2023-24. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it really speaks to their resilience,
Yeah.
when you consider the headwinds that the industry was facing. To understand this a little bit better, I think it's helpful to break down their revenue streams.
Okay, let's do that.
So export orders are still their bread and butter,
Right.
but they've also been very smart about diversifying their client base, and they've been growing their domestic sales within India as well.
Their strategic acquisitions must have played a role in this too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about the Atraco Group and Matrix Clothing.
Absolutely. Those acquisitions have been key drivers of growth. Atraco Group has operations in Kenya and Ethiopia,
Right.
which gives Gokaldas duty-free access to crucial markets like the US and Europe.
So it strengthens their global footprint.
Exactly. And then the acquisition of Matrix Clothing boosted their capabilities in high-value knitwear.
Interesting.
So now they're attracting even more discerning customer.
So they're expanding their product offerings and their geographic reach. Now let's talk about profitability. We know that the overall business environment was tough, but Gokaldas still managed to remain profitable. How did they pull that off?
Well, it's true that there were some challenges. Increased wages, startup costs for those new ventures that we talked about. All of that impacted profitability, but they still delivered a profit before tax of 159 crore, which is roughly 19 million US dollars.
That's no bad at all.
Not bad at all. To understand this in more detail, we need to look at their EBITDA margins and their profit after tax. These figures will give us a clearer picture of their operational efficiency and how well they're performing on the bottom line.
Now, their financial base seems pretty solid, right? I mean, they generated a healthy cash flow from operations without working capital changes, amounting to about 266 crore, or roughly 32 million US dollars.
Yeah. Their strong cash flow is definitely a positive indicator. It suggests that they're in a good position to manage their finances, invest in future growth, and navigate whatever challenges come their way.
Speaking of opportunities, let's look ahead to their order book, which can give us some insights into their future prospects. What can you tell us about their order book, and how is the anticipated market recovery impacting it?
Well, the expected market recovery that we've talked about, with the end of the inventory destocking cycle, is definitely creating some positive momentum for Gokaldas's order book. The exact size of their current order book isn't explicitly stated in the materials that we have, but we can still glean some valuable insights.
Okay, let's do some detective work. What can we infer?
Well, we know that Gokaldas Exports caters to these prestigious fashion brands and retailers across more than 50 countries. And their recent acquisitions, like we talked about, brought in new high-value customers. So this suggests a diverse and robust order book signaling healthy demand for their products.
So even without a precise figure, it seems safe to say that their order book is substantial and poised for further growth as the apparel industry rebounds.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about capacity utilization. We know that Gokaldas is investing heavily in expanding their production capabilities, but how efficiently are they using their existing capacity, and what are their plans for future expansion to meet that anticipated surge in demand?
Yeah, those are great questions.
Well, the specific capacity utilization percentage isn't provided in our materials, but Gokaldas has emphasized their commitment to optimizing efficiency across all of their manufacturing units. They've invested in advanced machinery, and they've implemented what are called lean manufacturing principles to really maximize output from their existing facilities.
That's smart. Before you even think about expanding, you've got to make sure that you're running a tight ship with what you've got.
Absolutely. And they've also mentioned that their new sewing factory in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh is expected to reach full capacity utilization soon.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Which is a really positive sign. It suggests that they're not just reacting to the market, but they're anticipating future demand and they're proactively preparing for it.
But now they also have a new fabric processing unit in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
And that seems like a pretty strategic move.
It is. It's all about vertical integration. By bringing fabric processing in-house, they get tighter control over the entire production process, from raw materials to the finished garment. And this gives them a real edge in terms of quality control, cost efficiency, and speed to market.
It sounds like they're building a well-oiled machine piece by piece. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture, the global trade dynamics and the textile sector's growth, particularly in India. How do these factors play into Gokaldas's future prospects?
This is where things get really interesting. India is increasingly positioning itself as a major player in the global textile market, and Gokaldas is perfectly positioned to capitalize on that trend. The Indian government has been really actively pushing for free trade agreements, or FTAs, with key markets like the UK and the EU.
And why are these FTAs so important?
Well, they can be game changers for companies like Gokaldas.
Hmm.
Imagine if the tariffs on textile imports from India to these markets are eliminated or even significantly reduced. It would make Indian textiles much more competitive on the global stage and open up a ton of new opportunities.
It's all about leveling the playing field and giving Indian manufacturers like Gokaldas a chance to really compete head-to-head with other global players.
Exactly. But FTAs aren't the only thing that the Indian government is betting on. They've also rolled out a bunch of other initiatives to really turbocharge the textile sector.
Like the production-linked incentive scheme and the mega integrated textile region and apparel or My Tire initiative.
Exactly. Those are some big
Those
ones.
sound pretty ambitious.
They are. The PLI scheme is all about encouraging domestic manufacturing and exports by offering financial incentives to companies like Gokaldas. And then MIT Ray is all about building world-class infrastructure for the industry. Integrated textile parks that are going to attract investment and create this thriving ecosystem.
So it sounds like India is really pulling out all the stops to become a textile powerhouse, and Gokaldas is right there in the thick of it. But, of course, every company has its Achilles heel, right? What about their financial health? Can they withstand potential storms and keep riding this wave of growth? What do you think?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've talked about their impressive revenue growth, but to really assess their long-term viability, we need to dive deeper into their debt levels, their cash flow, and their overall financial stability.
So let's start with debt. How much debt are they carrying, and is it manageable?
The sources that we have actually provide a very detailed breakdown of Gokaldas' borrowings.
Okay.
And it can seem a little overwhelming at first glance. But the good news is that while they do utilize debt financing, their financial statements indicate a pretty healthy debt-to-equity ratio. It seems like they're managing their debt pretty prudently and they haven't over-leveraged themselves.
Well, that's reassuring. What about their cash flow? Are they generating enough cash to meet their financial obligations, fuel these expansion plans, and just, keep the lights on?
Yeah, their financial statements show a really robust cash flow from operations, which is a really positive sign. It means they're generating enough cash internally to cover their operating expenses, invest in growth, and potentially even pay down some of that debt.
So it seems like Gokaldas is in a pretty solid position financially. But even financially sound companies face risks, right? What are some of the potential challenges that they could encounter in this ever-changing world of apparel manufacturing?
That's a crucial point. No company operates in a vacuum. Gokaldas, like any other global player, is exposed to external factors that could throw a wrench in the works.
So give us some examples. What are the big things that they need to keep an eye on?
Well, fluctuations in input costs, things like raw materials and energy prices, can really eat into profit margins. Currency exchange rates can also impact their bottom line, especially since they operate in multiple countries.
And then, of course, there's always the threat of competition.
Oh, absolutely. The apparel industry is incredibly competitive, both domestically and globally. Gokaldas has to constantly stay ahead of the curve, innovate, and differentiate themselves to stay relevant.
So how are they mitigating these risks? It sounds like they're juggling a lot of moving parts.
They are, and that's why having a really robust risk management strategy is key. For example, to deal with those fluctuating input costs that we talked about, they've implemented dynamic pricing models that allows them to adjust their prices as needed to protect their margins.
Makes sense. What about competition? How are they holding their own against their rivals?
Well, they're focusing on differentiation through innovation technology and their commitment to sustainability. They're investing in research and development to create new cutting-edge fabrics and designs.
Interesting.
They're also leveraging technology to streamline production and enhance the customer experience. And as we discussed earlier, their sustainability initiatives are attracting those environmentally conscious consumers and investors.
It's clear that they're not just sitting back and hoping for the best. They're actively identifying potential risks and taking proactive steps to mitigate them. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to their commitment to sustainability. It's not just a buzzword for Gokaldas. It seems to be deeply woven into their business practices.
Absolutely. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore exactly how Gokaldas is integrating sustainability into every aspect of their operations, from their sourcing practices to their treatment of employees and the communities where they operate. We'll also discuss whether they have what it takes to truly become a leader in ethical and responsible apparel manufacturing.
That's a really great question, and I think it's one that a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing the answer to. So we'll continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of Gokaldas Exports after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Gokaldas Exports. Before the break, we were talking about Gokaldas and their commitment to staying ahead of the curve when it comes to their production capacity. They've got these ambitious expansion plans, but it's clear that they're also laser-focused on making the most out of their existing setup.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Before you even think about expanding, you need to make sure that you're running a tight ship. And that's exactly what Gokaldas is doing. They've invested heavily in advanced machinery, and they've implemented what are called lean manufacturing principles to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of their existing facilities.
You know, it reminds me of that old saying, work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
But eventually you hit a ceiling with what you can do, right? And that's where these strategic expansions come in.
Exactly. And they're not messing around. They've got this brand new sewing factory in Bhopal, in the heart of India, and that factory is expected to be producing 3 million garments a year once it's fully up and running.
3 million.
Yeah, that alone tells you how serious they are about meeting that future demand.
It's a statement for sure. And they're not stopping there either. They've also got that new fabric processing unit in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
And that seems like a really smart move.
It is. It's all about vertical integration.
Now,
By bringing that fabric processing in-house, they get much tighter control over the entire production process, from raw materials to the finished garment, and that gives them a real edge in terms of quality control, cost efficiency, and speed to market.
they're not wasting any time.
Yeah.
It's like they're building this well-oiled machine piece by piece. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader context here. We're talking about global trade dynamics and the textile sector's growth, especially in India. How do these factors play into Gokaldas' future prospects?
That's a great question. This is where things get really interesting for Gokaldas. India is really working hard to position itself as a major player in the global textile market. And Gokaldas is perfectly positioned to benefit from that trend. The Indian government has been actively pushing for these free trade agreements, or FTAs, with key markets like the UK and the EU.
Now, for those of us who aren't trade experts, can you explain why these FTAs are so important?
Sure. You know, they can be real game changers for companies like Gokaldas. Imagine what happens if the tariffs on textile imports from India to these markets are completely eliminated or even just significantly reduced. It would make Indian textiles way more competitive on the global stage, and it would open up a whole bunch of new opportunities.
So it's all about leveling the playing field and giving Indian manufacturers like Gokaldas a chance to go head-to-head with the big players.
Exactly. Now, the Indian government isn't just focusing on FTAs. They've also rolled out a bunch of other initiatives to really jumpstart the textile sector.
Now we're talking about things like the production-linked incentive scheme and the mega integrated textile region and the apparel initiative, or MITRA initiative, right? Those sound pretty ambitious.
They are. The PLI scheme is all about encouraging domestic manufacturing and exports by offering financial incentives to companies like Gokaldas.
Okay.
And MITRA, that's all about building world-class infrastructure for the industry. We're talking about integrated textile parks that are going to attract investment and create this thriving ecosystem.
So it sounds like India is really pulling out all the stops to become a textile powerhouse, and Gokaldas is right there in the middle of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But every company has its weaknesses, right? What about their financial health? Can they weather the storms that might come their way and keep riding this wave of growth? What do you think?
Well, that's a crucial question. We've talked a lot about their revenue growth,
Right.
but to really understand if they can succeed in the long run, we need to look closely at their debt levels, their cash flow, and their overall financial stability.
Okay, let's do that. Let's start with debt.
Mhm.
How much debt are they carrying, and is it manageable?
Now, luckily, the materials that we have give a very detailed breakdown of Gokaldas' borrowings. And I have to admit, it can seem a little overwhelming at first glance.
I bet.
But there's good news. While they do use debt financing, their financial statements point to a pretty healthy debt-to-equity ratio. It seems like they're managing their debt very carefully, and they haven't gone overboard.
Well, that's a relief. Now, what about cash flow? Are they generating enough cash to cover all their expenses, fuel those expansion plans, and just basically keep the lights on?
Their financial statements show a really strong cash flow from operations, which is a great sign. It means they're making enough money from their core business to cover all their day-to-day expenses, invest in future growth, and even potentially pay down some of that debt.
So it seems like Gokaldas is in a pretty good spot financially. But even the most financially sound companies face challenges, right?
Right.
What are some of the things that could go wrong for them in this ever-changing world of apparel manufacturing?
Yeah.
You know, you're right. No company is immune to risk. Gokaldas, like any other global player, is exposed to all sorts of external factors that could really throw a wrench in the works.
Give us some examples. What are the big things that they really need to keep an eye on?
Well, one of the big ones is fluctuations in input costs. Things like raw materials and energy prices can really eat into those profit margins.
Oh, for sure.
And then currency exchange rates can also have a big impact on their bottom line, especially since they're dealing with multiple currencies.
That makes sense. And then there's that constant pressure from competitors.
Exactly. The apparel industry is super competitive, both here in India and around the world.
Mm.
So Gokaldas has to constantly be innovating and differentiating themselves to stay ahead of the pack.
So how are they managing all these risks? It sounds like they've got a lot on their plate.
They do, and that's why having a solid risk management strategy is absolutely essential. For example, to deal with those fluctuating input costs that we talked about, they've implemented what are called dynamic pricing models, and these models allow them to adjust their prices as needed to protect those profit margins.
Pretty smart. What about competition? How are they staying ahead of their rivals?
Their strategy is all about differentiation. They're focusing on innovation, technology, and sustainability. They're putting money into research and development to create new cutting-edge fabrics and designs.
Interesting.
They're using technology to streamline their production processes and make the customer experience even better. And as we discussed earlier, those sustainability initiatives are helping them attract environmentally conscious consumers and investors.
So they're not just sitting back and crossing their fingers. They're taking a proactive approach to identifying risks and figuring out ways to minimize them. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to that commitment to sustainability. We've talked about it quite a bit, but it's clear that it's not just lip service for Gokaldas. It seems like it's really ingrained in how they do business.
I agree. In the final part of our depth dive, we're going to explore how Gokaldas is putting sustainability into practice in every corner of their operations, from how they source their materials to how they treat their employees and the communities they work in. We'll also discuss whether they have what it takes to truly become a leader in ethical and responsible apparel manufacturing.
That's a great question. And I think it's something that a lot of consumers and investors are really starting to pay attention to. So we'll be back after a quick break to continue our exploration of Gokaldas Exports. Welcome back to our deep dive into Gokaldas Exports. We've been talking about their history, their growth, their financials, and those ambitious expansion plans. But throughout all of that, there's this other really important theme that keeps coming up, sustainability. It seems like it's a core value for them.
It really is. And you're right. It's something that's becoming more and more important in the fashion world these days. Consumers are way more aware of the impact that their clothing has on the planet, and they're demanding that brands step up and be more transparent and accountable. And it seems like Gokaldas really gets that.
Yeah, it's not just about slapping a sustainable label on something anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a fundamental shift in how you do business, right?
Exactly. Gokaldas has set these really ambitious targets for themselves. They want to be net zero in terms of emissions. They want to be water positive, meaning they give back more water than they take. And they want to completely eliminate solid waste going to landfills. They're focusing on energy efficiency, water conservation, and waste reduction across all of their facilities.
And they're not just talking about it either. I mean, we mentioned earlier that they've already reduced water usage by 20%. That's huge.
It is. It shows real commitment. What other concrete steps are they taking?
Well, they're doing a lot. They're increasing their use of recycled fibers, and they're looking into some pretty cool technologies like e-flow machines.
E-flow machines.
Yeah, it sounds futuristic, but these machines use nanobubbles to reduce the amount of water and energy needed in the garment finishing process.
So they're innovating not just in terms of design and production, but also in terms of sustainability. Exactly. And their commitment goes beyond just the environment. They're also really focused on social responsibility. They're prioritizing the well-being of their employees. They're investing in skill development, and they're engaging with the communities where they operate.
That's fantastic. It's one thing to talk about ethical practices, but it's another thing to actually put programs in place that make a real difference. What are some examples of their social responsibility initiatives?
Well, they've got a bunch of different programs. One example is their We Lead program, which focuses on empowering women in the workforce and promoting women's leadership.
That's awesome.
They also have the Rise program, which is all about improving the overall well-being of their employees. And they've been involved in a bunch of community development projects as well, supporting local schools, hospitals, and other essential services.
So they're not just focused on profits. They're taking a more holistic approach to business and considering the impact they have on their employees and the communities they work in. It all comes back to that question we asked earlier. Does Gokaldas Exports have what it takes to become a true leader in sustainable apparel manufacturing?
You know, I think they're well on their way. Their commitment to sustainability is undeniable. You can see it in what they're saying and in what they're doing. And they're really in sync with what consumers and investors are looking for these days. People want to see ethical and sustainable practices.
It seems like the demand for ethical fashion is only going to grow stronger, and Gokaldas is in a great position to ride that wave.
Exactly. And they're also in a really strategic position to benefit from India's push to become a global hub for sustainable textile manufacturing. You've got the government initiatives, and then you've got Gokaldas's own proactive approach. It's a pretty compelling combination.
It's clear that sustainability is no longer just a nice to have. It's a must have if you want to succeed in the fashion industry. And Gokaldas seems to really understand that.
They do. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, they're taking concrete steps to make sustainability an integral part of their business.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Gokaldas Exports, what are your key takeaways? What are you going to be watching for as their story continues to unfold?
It's been a fascinating journey for sure. I'm really impressed with their strategic vision, their willingness to embrace innovation, and their genuine commitment to doing things the right way. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on how they leverage all of these strengths to navigate the challenges and capitalize on the opportunities that are out there.
I agree. It's been a really insightful deep dive. We've learned so much about Gokaldas Exports and where they fit into the global apparel industry. And it's clear that they're a company that's worth paying attention to. So that's it for this deep dive, folks. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new along the way. As always, stay curious and keep exploring the world around you.